Hey, you sister students, welcome back to our second day in U.S. history. We're hanging out here in the early part of U.S. history before we jump into the part of our curriculum after the Civil War, but we're hitting on a few things like the Constitution, the Declaration, some Founding Fathers, and so today we're going to touch on the second part of that stuff. All right, so first thing, Bill of Rights. We kind of touched on it yesterday. This is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. It promises individual liberties. It basically lays out all of your basic rights as an American citizen, and it's tacked on to the end of the Constitution with the first 10 amendments, and we're going to go through each of these real briefly. Okay, number one is freedom of speech, press, assembly, petition, and religion. And so you can remember those by thinking RAPS, R-A-P-P-S, and that stands for religion, assembly, press, petition, and speech. So the government can't tell you you don't have the right to free speech or the right to petition your government, or you have the right to choose how you celebrate your religious values and the right to assemble and all these things. Number two, most people don't have a problem with this one. It's the right to bear arms. You have the right to own firearms in this country. Number three, no forced quartering of soldiers. So this came about because the British forced the colonists to allow British soldiers into their homes and to feed them and take care of them, and so they wanted protections from this in the future, and so it was tacked on to the Bill of Rights, onto the Constitution. Number four, so the right against unlawful searches and seizures. So the government must have either a warrant or probable cause to search your car and a warrant to search your home. And I always remember this because it's number four, and there's 4 wheels on a car, and there's no unlawful searching and seizing of your vehicle. The Fifth Amendment has quite a lot to it. The first part being the right to not incriminate yourself. And so you may have heard in the movies, or you may have heard someone say that they plead the fifth, which means that they are not going to testify against themselves. They don't have to answer questions that will incriminate themselves. Double jeopardy, which means once you are found not guilty of a crime, you can't be put on trial again for that same crime. Eminent domain, the government has the ability to take your home if it's in the public interest, like if they're expanding a highway like I-35, or they're trying to build a park or whatever. If it's in public interest, then they take your home. And you have the right to a grand jury of your peers that will hear your case and determine whether there's a case to be made against you in court if you are accused of a crime. The Sixth Amendment is known as the rights of the accused. So if you are accused of a crime, these are the certain rights that you have as a citizen. I'm going to touch on just 2 main ones: the right to a speedy trial and a public trial. So you have the right to not be held for a long time without having a hearing, without having a trial, and you have the right to have that public and to hear the witnesses against you in court. So the Seventh Amendment is right to a trial by jury in a civil case, which means it's not a criminal case, so you're not being accused by the government or the state of wrongdoing, but you are being accused by another citizen of wrongdoing, and usually civil suits involve monetary value. They involve money. And so in cases with large amounts of money on the line, someone is suing someone for another large amount of money, these cases, you have the right to have a jury hear that case and determine who is right and who is wrong in that case. Number 8, you have the right against cruel and unusual punishment. So that means you can't be tortured and the punishment must fit the crime. You can't steal a pack of gum and be executed, that sort of thing. I remember this because number 8, if you flip it sideways, kind of looks like handcuffs. So it's kind of like punishment, cruel and unusual punishment on number 8. Number 9 is powers reserved to the people. So in the Ninth Amendment, the writers were saying that just because we didn't specifically give a certain right to the citizens does not mean they don't have that right. So an example would be the Constitution doesn't say anything about the right to privacy, but that doesn't mean that privacy is not a right, and that's something that can be determined through the court system, and additional rights can be given to people. Number 10 is powers reserved to the state, which means that anything that the federal government does not have the job to do and is not laid out to do in the Constitution falls to the state. So in this case, state of Texas. So the Constitution doesn't say anything about determining making driver's licenses. So the state of Texas will issue your driver's license, or education. So the state of Texas determines what type of education is set up, what kind of system is set up, and what you learn in that system. So anything not given to the federal government falls to the states in the 10th Amendment. Here's the rest of the amendments, 11 to 27. I'm not going to touch on each of them for the sake of time in this video, but you can pause the video and take a look at them. Here are some tricks to help you remember amendments from 13 on to 25. I'm also not going to touch on these here, but you can take a look and see them here if you'd like to. During the early part of American history, Americans were finding their own way, and there were many Europeans that would come over to the country, and they noticed differences between Europe and the United States. They noticed that there were no hereditary social classes, so Americans had upward mobility and were able to earn money and earn their way in life and in society. And you can start out poor and become rich, and you can start out with little humble beginnings but become famous. And 2 French immigrants that came to America wrote about these differences, and we're going to touch on them briefly. First one, Hector St. John de Crevecoeur. He noticed that Americans were hardworking, that it was this melting pot, mixing pot. There was no kings to dictate, and so Americans were becoming this new breed of, I guess, human being that had not been seen before. And the second guy, Alexis de Tocqueville, he was a Frenchman. He came to the United States to study our prison system, and he wrote a book on what he saw. He was fascinated by how democracy worked in this country. He didn't think it was all good, but he thought there were good parts to it. And he felt like, yes, it is good that they can work hard and they can have upward mobility, and everyone's equal, but he felt like it didn't promote the excellence that Europe did by training up these hereditary figures to rule and be noble. However, Tocqueville did pull out 5 values that we're going to discuss briefly that he thought were crucial to the American democracy and that were good in the United States. And number 1 is going to be egalitarianism, which means people are equal. So Americans, even though one may have more money or more fame than another, they all have equality in social settings and under the government. 2 is populism, which means that common people participated in political life. People head to town hall meetings and they vote and they do different things in the United States that people in Europe had never even thought about doing. It was left up to the nobility and the political elites to run the country. 3 is liberty, which is protection against a tyrannical government. The Constitution is in place to make sure that people's rights are protected, and there's checks and balances on government to keep it from becoming too powerful. Number 4, individualism. So you are free to flourish and do what you want with your life as an individual without having to worry about, oh, I'm born into this social class, I have to stay in this social class. No, you can be born poor, become rich. You can be born to humble beginnings and become famous. You can become president. You can lead your city. You can do whatever you want to do. And lastly, laissez-faire, which is a French word that means hands off. So the government takes a hands-off approach. Mainly when we see this, it's dealing with the economy, which means the government isn't dictating how the economy is going to run. It lets supply and demand and free market determine what's best. And that allows for businesses to flourish and people to make money without a bunch of government interference.